He's just been an extraordinary leader and now has a really big issue on his hands, and we're lucky to have a chance to hear from him. So Senator Markey, please welcome.
So Danny, thank you so much, and you're somebody I've known pretty much my entire technological life, and they're so lucky to have you over here, and I'm so lucky to have you as my friend, and I very much appreciate the ability to put together something like this on such short notice, and I thank you for that. And I thank Taylor Reynolds, the Director of Technology Policy at MIT Internet Policy Research Initiative, and your fantastic staffs. If you could stand up, please, just so we can give you, the thanks of everyone here. Taylor, thank you very much. We're about to have an historic fight on the floor of the Senate and the House. And I thought it would be altogether appropriate for us to have an event here, because within a month, we're going to be having a vote on the floor of the United States Senate on net neutrality to uphold the rules that had been put on the books by the Obama FCC, or to move to this new Trump Wild West that was created beginning in December of 2017. And it's here in the mid-1960s that a company, Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, received the award to begin to invent the packet switch network, the ARPANET. And it was that company that began the whole process right here within about 400 yards of where we are seated. And that revolution all started here at MIT. They were mostly MIT professors, MIT graduate students that ultimately turned into something which we now call the internet. So we have an all-star cast here tonight to discuss these issues, and we'll reach a point in a little while where the microphones will be down here, and anyone who wishes to participate will have an opportunity to do so. So we have the net neutrality dream team that is sitting right in front of you. We are joined by the former chairman of the Federal Communications Commission in the Obama era, Tom Wheeler. And he is responsible as chairman for putting the open internet order on the books in 2015. So everyone in this room owes a debt of gratitude to Tom Wheeler, putting those long overdue rules on the books. Few leaders at the Federal Communications Commission have known better how to protect and expand the horizons by promoting competition in the telecommunications marketplace than Tom. But it's not just that, it's pro-consumer, it's pro-privacy. He understands that ultimately we must protect consumers, and we must also inject paranoia-inducing Darwinian competition into the marketplace on an ongoing business. That is what he did. Next, we're fortunate to be joined by the iconic Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He is a legendary computer scientist. He is a professor here at MIT, and he created this little thing called the World Wide Web. Sir Tim serves as a director for the World Wide Web Consortium, which oversees the standards for the internet and the World Wide Web. And here's all you need to know about Sir Tim. In the year 2000, when Time magazine was looking back at the entirety of the 20th century, to pick the top 20 scientists and thinkers, top 20 of the entire 20th century. Albert Einstein, the Wright brothers, Rachel Carson, Sigmund Freud, Sir Tim Berners-Lee is on that list of the top 20 thinkers. And while the web is an historic innovation, Sir Tim was actually working on something else when he came up with it. So the web is the most important side project ever since Einstein developed the theory of relativity in his spare time working at the US Patent Office down in Washington. So we thank you for multitasking, Sir Tim. Also joining us is Susan Crawford, the John A. Reilly Clinical Professor of Law at Harvard Law School, and she brings to this role a remarkable career in public service. She served as Special Assistant to the President for Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy in 2009 and led the FCC transition team between the Bush and Obama administrations, which is a little bit like managing security at a Red Sox Yankee game, but she is, if I had to pick one legal expert in the whole country, it would be her to be sitting here tonight. So we thank you. And finally, my great friend Mohamad Ali. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Carbonite, a data protection company based here in Massachusetts. He grew up in Guyana and came to the United States with his mother when he was 11 years old and $34 in their pockets. Since that time, he has become a US citizen, graduated with dual degrees, held leadership positions in technology companies, and now as CEO of Carbonite, serves as one of the digital economy's strongest advocates for net neutrality. He was also my guest this year. I pick one person each year to sit up in the gallery when the President of the United States was speaking. And I thought this year, an entrepreneur who is an immigrant, who was a Muslim, would be the right person. So this is the all-star team, and our audience probably has 20 more people who could comfortably sit up here as well, because I know I'm at MIT, and I appreciate that. So the internet is something that has evolved into something that is really a right for the 21st century. It's an indispensable tool which every citizen in our country has to have access to in a non-discriminatory way. And so what happened in December is that the FCC, the Trump FCC, gave internet service providers, Verizon, Comcast, Charter, AT&T, the ability to slow down certain websites, to altogether block users' access to websites, and to set up internet fast and slow lanes where those with the deepest pockets can whiz by those who do not have that internet easy pass, and the rest are left in an internet gravel path. And if that doesn't sound right to you, you're right. And you're joined by 86% of all Americans who agree with you, including 82% of all Republicans in the United States, which only shows the power of the internet service providers in their control over the agenda of this administration. So you just don't see that kind of bipartisan support on many issues. It's like a political Halley's Comet that has occurred around this issue. So we're seeing an incredible group of people who have stood up. We have governors in 5 states have issued executive orders. Attorneys general in 23 states have filed a lawsuit. 27 state legislatures, including here in Massachusetts, are working on net neutrality legislation. And we're actually joined here tonight by 2 of the leaders of this movement up in the Massachusetts legislature to pass our own net neutrality legislation here in the state of Massachusetts. The first person I'd like to introduce is State Senator Michael Barrett. He is the chairman of the Telecommunications, Utility, and Energy Committee. He's fighting for net neutrality. He is a real fighter. He just got discharged from Mass General, winning his battle with leukemia. Michael, thank you for all of his partner in the state senate to get this bill passed, Jamie Eldridge, state senator as well, and he is the leader of the Financial Services Committee and partnering with Michael to move this legislation through, and they're telling me there is a high probability that is going to happen through the Massachusetts State Senate. So Jamie Eldridge, please stand. And so I thought what I would do is I tried to begin just by showing you a 2-minute video. So Burger King has done a video on net neutrality. Now you say to yourself, why would Burger King have an ad on net neutrality? Its business model doesn't have anything to do with net neutrality. Nothing. You do not need net neutrality to sell hamburger. But they do know that if you're a millennial, if you're a young person, and they want you as a millennial to think that Burger King, an old hamburger company, not as cool as the other 100 hamburger joints within 9 blocks of where we are right now, how can you get those millennials to buy it? Well, how about if they come out for net neutrality and explain it? So what I would ask our great tech team up here to do is please roll the Burger King ad. Oh.
With net neutrality, some people, for what it's worth, just,
I don't know exactly what it is.
Got a number 1. Hey, how you doing?
Do you know what number 98 was followed?
Number 98, you got the Whopper?
Yeah.
So you got the slow access Whopper pass? It's on the menu right there with the fast, medium, slow.
Slow MBPS, fast MBPS, or hyper fast MBPS. MBPS, of course, standing for making burgers per second.
So if we want one now, we have to pay $26.
Well, that's how you get it fast. That's the highest priority.
This is like a lane
So
system?
maybe like 15, yeah, fast lane, slow lane. So like maybe like 15, 20 minutes.
What are you talking about?
There's a version of these that they can sell more and make more money selling like chicken sandwiches and chicken fries, so now they're slowing down the access to the Whopper.
Were you given an option of chicken sandwich or?
Yeah, I don't want a chicken sandwich. I want a Whopper.
Do you have any Whoppers ready that aren't?
Yeah. The sandwich is ready. I'm just not allowed to actually get it to
What?
you.
You can't give me the sandwich? It's ready, but you can't give it to me?
The Whopper neutrality was repealed. They voted on it.
Unfortunately, I have no other choice.
Oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever heard of.
See, like you got the fast. Now he's getting his.
Are you kidding me? You paid $26 for a Whopper?
Now he's a higher priority. So.
If,
Oh, guys, I got one burger, man.
if you'd like, if
This
you
is a bad dream right now. I just want
I'm looking for in Texas. Crazy.
here's what I'll do. You have the bag. I can put it in the bag in 42 seconds.
Hold on, 10 seconds. We don't make the rules.
You just enforce these ridiculous rules?
Fortunately, we have to.
I felt like I was being taken advantage of in a sense. Just as a customer coming in to get their food, it felt like a power move.
They already changed the policies overnight or whatever.
I didn't think that ordering a Whopper would really open my eyes up to net neutrality.
The Whopper actually taught me about net neutrality. It's stupid, but true.
they took over the Congress, the Republicans, in 1995, they put in something called the Congressional Review Act, which allows for the Congress to overturn, with a majority vote, any regulation that an administration had promulgated, thinking that they would start to overturn all of the Clinton era regulations. And so what's going to happen is within the next month, we're going to have a vote on the Senate floor on the Markey Congressional Review Act vote on net neutrality rules. And we need 51 votes. And right now, I have all 49 Democrats and Susan Collins from the state of Maine. And that's why the hashtag one more vote is so relevant. We need 51, but we want a lot more than 51 because then we have to send it over to the House of Representatives. So that's what tonight's all about. Kind of kicking off this 1 month campaign here in Cambridge to begin this national movement with 86% of all Americans agreeing with our side to have this first time ever overturning of a Republican president's regulation. Okay? And so it begins here in Cambridge in the same way that the internet began here in Cambridge, beginning in 1966. And what I'm going to do is ask each one of our great panelists to give an opening statement. Then I'm going to ask them a few questions. Then we're going to go to the audience, and I'm going to begin with Tom Wheeler, Chairman of the Federal Communications Commission in the Obama era. Welcome, Tom.
So I'm here for a really simple reason. I want to say thank you to you all for sending him to the United States Senate. He is the man leading the charge. You know, there's a lot of times in the Senate and elsewhere, you know, somebody will take credit because they signed on to do something. Ed Markey has been leading the charge on this. When I was the chairman of the FCC, it was Ed Markey who was on the phone saying, "Tell me, what are you going to be doing about net neutrality?" And we go back and forth and discuss various kinds of solutions. He has always been a champion for consumers and competition, and so I thank all of you. There are 3 simple reasons why this resolution has to pass and why the internet has to stay open. 1, the internet is the most powerful and pervasive platform in the history of the planet. Thanks to that guy right there. We use it for everything from ordering up all the world's knowledge to ordering a pizza. It has literally changed our economy and changed each of our lives. But there's a problem. And that's the second reason why this has to pass. When we were doing the work on the Open Internet Order, we discovered that 3/4 of all American homes had at most one choice for high-speed connection to the internet. One choice. And so we're in a situation, third point, we're in a situation where you've got a national asset that is crucially important to institutions and individuals, and a gatekeeper monopoly that can determine how you get to that asset: fast lane, slow lane, blocking, throttling, special deals. And you look at those 2 realities and you say, somebody has to make the rules. What the Trump FCC and the internet service providers are saying is, oh, don't worry, the companies can make the rules. You could trust them to do a good job making those rules. But the fact of the matter is that history has shown that you can't. And that's why we put the open internet rules in place in the first place. And that's why the Congressional Review Act, led by Senator Markey, has to prevail. So again, thank you to all of you for providing the spirit to keep fighting for a fast, fair, and open internet.
Well, thank you. It's horrible to be here. Really? We shouldn't have to be here. What you did was right. They shouldn't have reversed it. Now we're going to lose all this trouble. We thought we'd made progress. The world was becoming more organized and more logical and more powerful, and the technology layers were independently expanding and getting more powerful. But now we have to go and fix this. So please help fix this. What shall I say in this couple of minutes? I will just I will say what neutrality is for me, partly because you may, like me, come across you might come across another senator, for example, a different one who will remain nameless, who, when he talked passionately about how it's really important that the communication with media should be non-discriminatory, that everybody should have equal access to them. And I said, but so you're for net neutrality? He said, what? But net neutrality, you're the people who feel that I shouldn't be able to spend more money to buy a faster connection. What? Oh, wow, okay. And you realize that actually there's been so much very, very clever misinformation spread about net neutrality. Saying, the net neutrality is the people who want everybody to have the same bandwidth. Net neutrality those are the people who don't want to pay at all for the internet. They think everything should be free. Net neutrality, net neutrality, nobody knows what net neutrality is. Anyway, because we've managed to confuse them enough, so back now they don't. That was a Harvard professor stood up and said, well, nobody knows what net neutrality is anyway. So let me tell you, for me, inventing the World Wide Web, it was the internet being a platform. The internet is a platform in the sense that it is solid, it is flat, it has not got an attitude. When you build on, when I built the internet platform, I could just write programs that ran on my computer. It was an Xbox, really cool computer, and I could plug the computer into the wall, and I could run programs put programs on another computer, put a web server on one computer, and put a web browser on the other computer, plug them into the wall, and they would talk to each other. Didn't have to ask anybody. Because when Berners-Lee and company designed the internet, they designed it without any attitude about what it should be used for, just as a platform. The web is supposed to be a platform too. When you, if you like, it's a platform built on top of a platform. When you create something new and wonderful on the web, you don't have to come to me. There's no central point of control. You don't have to ask me to make a new website. You don't get a domain name. We'll talk about that separately. Not here. But the whole idea of the whole thing is that when the technology is completely independent, all I had to do was I had to think of a port number for those technical people. I had to think of a TCP port number. I chose my parents' telephone number. I need a 4-digit number, so I can remember it. And then later I applied for a really small number. I got 80, support 80. That was really, but I didn't even have to do that. The web could have continued using that 4-digit number. So the point about this being a platform is, it is from a technical point of view, but think about, okay, so there was an important thing about, one of the important things about net neutrality is that there's an important separate market for connectivity and for content. So way back then, when if I had taken my computer home and plugged it in at home, I could have maybe got 300 bits per second connection. And that the web browser would have run over that 300 bits per second modem. I can take the same program home now, and I could get myself a 300 billion bits per second. Right? That's nothing. As they developed trains, the trains got faster and faster, maybe started off at 30 miles an hour and ended up at maybe 300 if you're miles after that. Okay, so the trains got faster, the technology of trains got faster by an order of magnitude. But the technology of the internet got faster by a huge numbers of order of magnitude, of ridiculous, stupendous, unimaginable. It's ridiculous how fast the internet is compared to the 300 bits per second. You used to be able to listen to bits going on in those days. And so we went through this huge number of orders of magnitude of change in speed, of power of the internet without changing the way it was used, without changing the API, the interface to it. And so the same programs then will run. And so meanwhile, during that time, since 1989, 1990, not only has the connectivity expanded, but the content has expanded. People have put all kinds of weird things. People have taken, the idea of a web, what you put on a website, and made maps and search engines and all kinds of things. And they have all put their heart and soul into making the new exciting new social network or whatever it is. And so, the amount of content on the net has exploded to a ridiculous extent from the 26 websites we started with. And so the content has exploded separately. And you know what has been great, and the reason that it's worked, is that people working on the content, on designing a new website, didn't have to care at all about how that content was going to get to the people who looked at it. That was being done by the internet. And they just had to plug it into the internet, because the rule is that the two things were separate. So the explosion of stuff, content, and the explosion of connectivity were both amazing, and they were amazing because they were completely separate. They were amazing because they were separate markets. So net neutrality is, from the economic point of view, about keeping those separate markets. It has left the world with a huge, has gained a huge amount on both levels. America has a lot of leadership. But you can imagine the rest of the world still has a really fierce market for connectivity and a really fierce separate market for content, and America doesn't. America goes back to the cable TV model, where the content provider is in cahoots with the ISP. And you know what? They don't really have to make very good movies anymore, because they have a captive audience. And the ISP doesn't really have to really do a very good job, because because people have to go to the ISP, because the only way they can see what that particular set of movies. So if America was to go down that stage, that direction, it could be that the rest of the world would continue with net neutrality, with these huge gains. America would end up falling behind. So these are some of the things you can mention. Shows to your senators when you write to them, and your friends that you talk to, tell them to write to the senator when they're looking for that one more vote. But in the back of mind also, you can keep in mind, as many mentioned early on, that's the economic view of it. But actually, when you end up thinking about a human right, so actually we end up because it's not just about the economics, because also it's about whether I have the right to contact any religion I want to with any political party and so on. It's really about fundamental rights which underpin our society and our democracy. So at the end of the day, these are really, really core, important things that you're fighting for. Thank you for fighting for them.
One more time, please join me in showing our love and respect for Sir Tim's gift to the world. I'll tell you what net neutrality neutrality is. Net neutrality is every single American and every single company, with the exception of maybe 5, and they are Comcast, Charter, AT&T, and CenturyLink. Every other one of us is saying net neutrality means I am sick of the power those 5 companies have over me. That's what it means. Because after 30 years of, thank you, splendid attacks, and that's what's great about the momentum here. We'll go through the Congressional Review Act. It has to pass, but the momentum of this enormous issue doesn't stop there. It goes all the way to becoming the key domestic policy issue for the 2020 election. It has to, because this is a pocketbook issue for every single American. After 30 years of attacks on the idea that the government could have anything to do with economic policy, any intervention role in private markets, we are at an absurd moment right now, where although internet access is, as we all agree, something that every single American needs, we are somehow counting on the private market by their own grace and sort of goodwill to provide it to us at world-class speeds, reasonable prices, available to every single American. If you were standing on this stage in the 1950s under a Republican president, and you said, we can depend on the private market, an unrestrained private market, to take care of all of us and all of our essential needs, you would be laughed off the stage. Our parents and grandparents knew much better after 1914, the chaos of 2 world wars and a giant depression. They understood that when it comes to certain utilities, the private market is not going to do this by itself. Eisenhower built the American highway system. FDR ensured that we would have electricity reaching everybody at reasonable prices. Net neutrality, at its core, is an economic policy issue. We are leaving behind tens of millions of Americans, dumbing them down, not giving them the opportunities, the choices they have to have. We are allowing these 4 or 5 companies to extract rents from every single other American. We are allowing grotesque inequality in this country to continue that has a corrosive effect on every single civic institution, eroding trust, making some people feel as if they live in gated communities and others feel as if they have no hope. When, as we all know, high-speed internet access is paid through by the nose by rich people, by the way. No one's doing well in this particular situation. Rich are paying too much. Systematically, the poor are either not getting access at all or getting crappy access. And we somehow manage the telephone, we somehow manage electricity, but this central utility has escaped regulation entirely. And Tom Wheeler had the bravery in 2015 to label high-speed internet access as a utility. And that's what these actors are actually upset about. They're actually So when you're talking to people about net neutrality, don't let their eyes glaze over. This is really about abuse of power and the chaos and despair that comes from a completely unrestrained private market leads to unfairness, leads to dragging down every American business, and ultimately, and this is what I'm really worried about, weakens the fabric of democracy. Because it's not just about inclusion, it's about a sense of fellow feeling across the country, a sense of participating, a sense of we and connection that we are being denied because we believe so much in the religion of a private market. So please urge your representatives to be active on the Congressional Review Acts that Senator Markey is bringing about, but don't let this issue drop now. People are fighting all over the place. Sir Tim happens to live in a place that has a municipal fiber network. So they've chosen a public option, and they have escaped the clutches of these 5 companies, and everyone in that town can get access at a reasonable price that is world-class. But for most Americans, that isn't even a choice. As Tom said, 70% of Americans now have at most one choice for what in Sweden or in South Korea would be viewed as a second-class connection. So we're in the abyss on this issue. It has to become something that every candidate is asked. And I hope that tonight isn't the last time you will think about net neutrality. Thanks.
Sir, good evening. Earlier this year, I had the pleasure of meeting another Markey, Senator Markey's wife, Admiral Markey. Did you know? And she said to me, you know, he gets to take one person to the State of the Union address, and he's taking you and not me. She went on to say, but net neutrality is important, so I'm okay with it. So I want to just tell you a little bit about our company, Carbonite, and other companies as an example of other companies like ours. And I think pretty much every company now that uses the internet, and there are very few that I can think don't, is affected by this ruling on net neutrality. Carbonite was founded 12 years ago here in Boston. Today, we're headquartered in downtown. We employ about 1,000 employees, and we protect over 100,000 businesses. What does this mean? So if these businesses get attacked by ransomware, natural disaster, or just any other sort of downtime to their IT systems, we can recover them. We can recover them in hours, minutes, or even seconds. But we need the internet to do it. And we need the internet to not be controlled by someone else. We pay for the internet. We expect to get fair access and fair use of the internet. These 100,000 businesses rely on us. Over the last 36 months, we have recovered over 11,000 individuals and businesses from ransomware attacks. We've recovered all of them, and we've done it quickly over the internet. We're not the only company that use the internet. I'm standing here at MIT, the heart of Kendall Square. I sit on a board of a company called iRobot, which was founded right here at MIT. Thank you. iRobot uses the internet. GE uses the internet to connect all those jet engines and to do telemetry on those jet engines. Wayfair uses the internet. At Carbonite, we know that a 1-second delay on our website, we use it as e-commerce, will cost us millions of dollars in revenue. A company like Wayfair, it'll be tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. You don't have to do a lot to the internet to negatively affect companies. But it goes beyond the media companies that you hear about, like Netflix and so forth. This area right here, I'm in the heart of probably the #1 drug discovery place on the planet. When I was at IBM, I had the pleasure of working on our supercomputing project. And we sold those supercomputers to drug discovery companies to do massive computations of protein models and so forth in order to develop medication for our world. Today, it's done differently. It's done in giant clouds, public clouds at times, that are hosted by Amazon and Microsoft and others. And one of the key elements, the compute, is the bandwidth. And if there's somebody fiddling with the bandwidth, guess what? All these drug discovery companies could be impacted. Now, I've had people tell me that this is all theoretical. I'm going to give you some examples where it's not theoretical. So a number of years ago, in 2004, there's a telco that decided that they wanted to throttle Vonage. They were fined for it. AT&T was caught limiting access to FaceTime. They stopped doing it. Very recently, less than 12 months ago, Verizon was accused of throttling Netflix and YouTube. That has not really been addressed or resolved. And my favorite is also John Oliver's favorite. Anybody here see the John Oliver person? Yeah. And so for those of you who didn't, a little while back, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile decided that they were going to start a payment system, sort of like Apple Pay or Google Wallet, and they decided that they were going to block Google Wallet from participating. Well, there was one fatal flaw with their approach. You guys know, right? It was the name. The system was called ISIS. And you can imagine making a payment to ISIS, not such a good thing. And I'm so glad I didn't use it, because imagine a guy named Muhammad Ali making a payment to ISIS. Wouldn't that go over that well? Well, it didn't work out for them. Google Wallet still exists, Apple Pay still exists, and so forth. And so this is really not theoretical. These are just some of the more blatant ones that we have seen. The last thing I want to share with you is that this is not new. This discussion about fair and open access to something that is a substrate of innovation for our country. In the mid-1800s, there was this thing called the railroad. And the railroads connected our states. We didn't have 50 states back then. And these large railroad companies started charging big agricultural producers less than small farms to move their packets over their railroads. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. And what started happening is the large agricultural companies started buying out the small farms. Well, you can imagine back in the mid-1800s, there were a lot of people concerned about this, and since we were heavily a farming society, this raised a lot of attention. Senator John Sherman introduced a bill in the Senate, and that bill was passed 52-1. Imagine that. That was called the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. You roll forward, and in the early 1900s, the telephone becomes the substrate of innovation and communication and business for our country. And in 1936, the Telecommunications Act was passed in order to make sure there was free and open access to that substrate of innovation. Today, this is no different. The internet has really only been around for a short period of time. We're learning how to use it. It's innovating. It itself is changing very fast. And for us to give 5 companies control of our future just seems like the wrong thing to do. So with that, I want to thank Senator Markey for gathering us here today for this really incredibly important topic. Thank you.
Just an incredible gathering, and I would say we're joined by David Rogers. David is the state representative from Cambridge and Belmont, and he serves in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and he has introduced the net neutrality companion bill to what Senator Barrett and Senator Eldridge are introducing and going to pass through the state Senate. So please, David Rogers, please stand up. Chairman Wheeler, can you lay out for us what your rule did? What did you think was necessary to be in the rule in order to protect the smaller companies and the smaller voices in America? Can you lay out what you went into it philosophically to try to accomplish it, and what were the rules that you put on the books?
Well, there are 3 bright line rules. No blocking, no throttling, no fast lanes. That's just clear cut. But there are other aspects of the internet that that continue to evolve, and we don't really know what's going to happen next. There's something being developed by some folks in a garage or a classroom or a laboratory here at MIT that's going to change things tomorrow. So how do you put in place a structure that says we will keep observing to make sure that things are just, what happens is just and reasonable? And we call that the general conduct rule, where we would take a look And, I didn't go to MIT, I went to the Ohio State University. And we always think of things in football analogies. And so I always kept saying, we want a referee on the field who can throw a flag. And that's the power that we gave the FCC to do going forward. But there's another issue, and that is that the internet actually was originally called internetworking and got shortened because the internet is nothing more than a bunch of networks all connecting with each other. And so the concept of interconnection is crucial because if you can't connect to other networks, there is no internet. So we said we're asserting jurisdiction over interconnection. Well, you'll recall that there have been problems along the way where some of these last mile carriers, the 5 companies that Susan mentioned, were saying, well, I'm not sure I want to interconnect, or if I'm going to interconnect, you're going to do it on my terms and pay me extra. So we asserted jurisdiction over interconnection. And then lastly, we also said that there's one thing that monopolies are really good at, and that's raising prices. And that we ought to make sure that there is in the FCC the ability to oversee what happens in terms of pricing. We didn't regulate rates. We said, okay, again, we're going to watch. But if it doesn't work, if you start misbehaving, the FCC can be there. And then lastly, privacy. Last week, Senator Markey was in a hearing with Mark Zuckerberg, and we heard about all of this incredible amounts of data that Facebook has about each and every one of us. Did that remind you that Facebook is one website, and that the networks, the internet service providers that connect you to the network and connect you to all those other websites see what you're doing? So one of the things we did immediately after declaring that ISPs were common carriers was we passed a privacy rule that said they have the responsibility to protect your privacy, but more importantly, it is your information, not theirs. And that you had to give them permission, not some kind of long, drawn out, buried in paragraph 43B of some document, not some kind of an opt-out situation, but they had to get affirmative consent from you to opt in before they could get and use your information. It's the same rule that exists for telephones and has forever. I promise I'll end it. If you make a telephone call from Boston to Air France, Verizon can't turn around and sell that information to a tour operator in Paris that said, hey, they're going to Paris. But if you use the same device, your mobile phone, on the same network to go to a website for Air France, you have no privacy, and that information can be sold. That's not right. We passed a rule saying that your privacy needed to be protected. Unfortunately, the aforementioned Congressional Review Act, 67 days into the Trump administration, the Congress passed a law repealing it. President Trump signed it, and it was worse than that. They said, not only we repeal it, but this law says the FCC never again will be allowed to have a rule like this. That's the kind of things that we're dealing with. But it depends on this common carriage basis for everything to come on top of it.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Now, Mohamad, your company has 1,000 employees, but 12 years ago, 0. They had no employees. Now, last year,
nearly half of all venture capital in America, half of all venture capital went to software in internet-specific companies, startups, new companies, half of all venture capital. Now, if net neutrality is on the books, there are protections for those companies. Huh? But what happens if there isn't net neutrality in terms of their ability to guarantee to their investors that they're going to be able to reach this vast internet marketplace? Can you talk about that impact on job creation?
Absolutely. First of all, the small companies, the startup, the mid-sized companies are the ones that are going to be greatest, most impacted, because today the large companies, the Netflix and the Googles and so forth, they're big companies. They have a lot of leverage with these 5 large carriers and other carriers, and they'll probably do fine. But Senator Markey just pointed out that that a lot of all this investment that is going into these new companies they're new companies. They're small companies, and these companies, almost all of them. I mean, I can't think of a company today that is being started that isn't leveraging the internet in a major way. And if you're not leveraging the internet in a major way, it's going to be a problem, right? I mean, even transportation, you have companies like Uber, you have Grubhub. I mean, every sector that you can look at, the internet is important. Now, if you have 5 big companies that can control and throttle and manipulate that internet, they don't have to have a reason for doing that today, but at some point they might have a reason and it could be a problem. And so these companies that are being started, I think many of you know here that it's really the small and mid-sized businesses that are the job creation engine of almost every economy out there. And that's no different here in the United States. And actually here in Massachusetts, it's particularly important because we have so many startups, so many small and mid-sized businesses. Those businesses will not be as successful. And if they're not as successful, you're not going to create as many jobs. Now think about it, the engine of job creation is being throttled here, right? So it's beyond just throttling bandwidth. I mean, we are throttling our economy if we go down this path.
Okay, thank you, Mohamad. Now, Susan Crawford, it's not just economic impact. There are also First Amendment implications. There are also free speech implications to a repeal of net neutrality. Can you talk about that and what it could mean going forward in our country?
Sure. You may be surprised to hear this, but these companies actually believe that they are speakers, that they are sort of media companies themselves, and they want to have complete power to decide, they want to retain that power, to decide what speech is heard and what isn't. The idea that we would put our communications at risk of not only being slowed, but blocked entirely should be abhorrent, should be appalling to every American. That's why we regulated the telephone system. Alone among developed countries, you should know, the US has always relied on private carriers to take our basic communications. We always have private carriers in this business, but we've always subjected them to public obligations. And one of the chief public obligations is to carry all speech without discrimination, not to favor their own business deals in doing it. Not having a regime that ensures that every American can have a voice, can participate, can launch a business, can also listen as well as speak, hands over to these carriers the ability to shape speech. The Nixon White House deeply understood this. When the cable industry was first emerging, a young Antonin Scalia was the staffer on a White House report that said it is essential, 1974 report, it is essential that the cable industry be divided, as Sir Tim suggested, between transmission and content, and that cable be allowed only to be a transmission provider. Why? Because if you let them both own content and transmission, they will inevitably pick and choose speech. And they said, the Nixon White House said this was too fundamental a risk to democracy and our First Amendment freedoms to go forward. They went up on the Hill with this grand White House report, and there were already lobbyists for the cable industry that killed it. So we lost that battle very early in the game, but it is not too late when it comes to the internet to ensure that the public has a cop on the beat, just as Tom said. And it is essential to democracy, to speech, to everything we hold dear as Americans to get this right.
Great, thank you. So Tim, you invented the World Wide Web, and we use kind of the term net neutrality, but what it really means is non-discrimination. Just another way of saying non-discrimination, to protect smaller companies, smaller voices, right? So that's really what it is. It's a core principle. And so I guess what I would ask you, Sir Tim, is when you were inventing this organizing principle for the internet, the World Wide Web, was it your intent that this principle of non-discrimination, accessibility, transparency be built into it, baked into its very core? And when you and several other internet pioneers last year wrote a letter to the FCC asking them not to repeal net neutrality, how did you put that letter together? And what was the common feeling of you and the other internet pioneers in sending that letter to Ajit Pai and the Trump Federal Communications Commission?
So that was put together with a big sigh, like I thought, then why do we have to do this? I suppose that also the attempt, you always try to write a letter so that using the terms that the recipient will understand. And so here I can talk about bits and important to an MIT audience, and but it was a question of trying to put it in, trying to find terms which would echo, and so I think so I think largely part of it going from the market, the separation of the two markets as being important for American, for the future American competitiveness. I remember went to DC, we talked about what would happen, that perhaps Bollywood would, in fact, if Bollywood competed in a world where, with Hollywood, in a world where Hollywood had sort of slight deals on the sides and bribed their ISPs to get the stuff delivered and to block Bollywood, then actually Bollywood would become very much more effective because they would be competing openly in a fierce market for the best quality. And so whereas, and similarly with the network, if American networks were, the point I made that America is so far about those two markets being separate, but if it didn't, then America would lose out to the rest. We didn't talk about human rights. Anyway, in Washington, you don't talk about human rights, you talk about American values. Because human rights are just not part of it. And everything goes back to constitutional rights. It's, the constitutional, and so you will get people to sit up and agree, yes, constitutional right, every American child should be able to visit. And as long as you base it on the Constitution, so you talk about America, and then in a way you can translate your human rights into things like that. But I certainly felt that these things, the human, compared to Europe, the human rights and stuff, places like Holland, human rights, and of course in the UN has adopted the ability to communicate anybody as a human right, act of human rights. So yes, different ways of putting together letters for for different people. But as you say, non-discrimination is a pretty good non-discrimination. The fact that seems to echo pretty well, even amongst people, so among people who looked at other media and realized that in fact they're non-discriminatory. The idea that the medium of which you could use to communicate, even it should never discriminate. It should allow you to, just as you phoned anybody, you should be able to go to anybody's website. I think that's interesting. I hope it does.
Yeah, I just want to say this on Sir Tim. You know, he runs the his consortium, the World Wide Web Consortium. It's a big vision, same kind of vision that Nick Ponte had here at the MIT Media Lab when he founded it in 1885, and I would go over here and talk to him here, and Joey Ito has even today, and fundamentally, Sir Tim says his goal when he thinks of non-discrimination is the poorest child in the most isolated village anywhere in the world has access to the internet, has access to this technology, and that's his goal. In 1992, I passed a law that kind of created the 18-inch satellite dish, and then in 1993, I moved over 200 megahertz. They created the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th cell phone license because the first two companies, the monopolies, had analog, and it was the size of a brick, and it cost 50 cents a minute. But by 1996, everybody had this flip phone in their pocket, under 10 cents a minute. Revolution was on. 10 years later, everybody had this in their pocket. Had this in their pocket. And guess what? 800 million people in Africa now have this because we left. But we have to lead. We have to say, you can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't have the United States be preaching to the rest of the world. You should be open. You should have communication systems that allow for voices to be heard, for small companies to rise up, and then back here in America to be passing laws that go in just the opposite direction. It doesn't work that way. We have to be the leader, not the laggard. That's where net neutrality, that's where climate science comes from. You can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't pull out a Paris agreement and then tell the rest of the world that they should reduce their pollution. We have to be. And I'm very proud of this. Moving over the 200 megahertz. I don't invent anything, but the 200 megahertz helped make it possible. And I can even see, looking out at the audience right now, there's about 50 people looking down at their iPhone right now, not even paying attention to me. And that's our goal, that no one in the world is actually looking up. It should be democratized, this access to the technology. Tom Wheeler, again.
I would just follow up on something that Tim said and make sure everybody is aware of this. Sir Tim is the living embodiment of the concept of openness that is at the heart of the internet. He invented the World Wide Web. It's his. He could have cashed in big time. But instead, he said, no, I'm giving it away. It's open. Okay? An incredibly selfless act for humanity that now is threatened by 5 companies who say that incredible gift that Tim Berners-Lee gave the world, we want to monetize by choking, by prioritizing, by slowing things down. That's the contrast that you're seeing up here tonight.
We have a question. Lori is right down here with the microphone, and over here, Nolan has a microphone. So please ask a question. So Nolan, how do we want to do it? Right down here, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can. Yes, sir.
Hi. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Because I think a lot of us here participated in the fight against SOPA and PIPA, we understand that this current Agent High debacle is but one threat against a free and open internet. So I'd like to ask a two-part question for the panel. I'd like to ask with respect to the recent SESTA-FOSTA regulation, which the ACLU, EFF, and Senators Biden and Paul have said can stultify small businesses by imposing upon them stultifying liability and also create a chilling effect for open platforms. How would you advise legislators to craft regulations to prevent the spread of malicious content while also ensuring that open platforms can freely operate? And to Senator Markey, this legislation has been protested by a number of sex worker organizations because it could endanger them, denying them the ability to vet their clients using the internet, which seems to be part of a broader trend of legislators not considering how people at the margins can be affected by internet regulations. So would you make a promise to meet with the Sex Worker Outreach Project and other sex worker advocacy groups to address how we can modify this legislation to address their concerns?
I'd be glad to meet with you. Okay, so my staff is right over here. You can hook up with them. But Susan, would you like to talk about the legal questions which he posed?
Look, there are threats everywhere, and I think there's a deep and abiding concern by the American people that these platforms not be unfairly treated. I think, though, that we are also seeing a rise in desire to have censorship in America. And I think what all of us are saying up here is that we need to be able to present a choice between China and America. In China, no line between the public and private, but things are happening over there. We have a public sector set of values here that we need to uphold, that will actually allow the private sector to do extremely well in the end. So I'm just hoping we can hang on to a firm public-private line in the United States and bolster our public sector to be the best regulator possible.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I'm pretty confident that my senators and representatives are well educated in getting good advice on topics about the internet. But watching some of the questions that were asked to Mark Zuckerberg last week, I'm a little concerned about everybody else in the room. And I'm curious what the panel thinks we can do to better educate our congressmen and senators to ensure that they're making decisions fully informed.
Okay. Well, I'm an expert on that. Okay. A congressional expert is an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp or Salt Lake City nightlife. So we're really not experts on the technology. Tim Berners-Lee is an expert. Susan Collins is an expert. Mohamad is an entrepreneurial expert. Tom Willett is a regulatory expert. But Congressman, not so much, except for this. Elections, we're experts. All I can tell you is that Congress is a stimulus response institution. And we have 1 month right now. Hashtag one more vote. And as the preceding question just said on SOPA and PIPA, 10 million people bombarded Congress and completely overturned conventional wisdom in 1 week. Now, net neutrality is that issue on steroids, with 86% of Americans wanting this rule overturned. So all I can tell you is the power is right here. And by the way, we have 100 people in the overflow room, so we thank all of you and your patience in being here. So we have 500 people. As you all know, we did this on very short notice, so we appreciate all of you being here, and MIT especially. Danny, thank you for your short notice ability to put all of this together. So I guess what I would say to you is, even in this room right now, you could probably figure out how to gin up 1 million, hits on congressmen and senators across the country. The capacity, the algorithms are all there to kind of put something together here. And believe me, they already know it's an issue. Because when they're home, you just have to say the words net neutrality and the applause breaks out, right? So they know it's an issue. They don't have to. You don't have to understand nuclear power and be a nuclear physicist to understand that people who live near one want safety in that plant. You don't have to understand the internal combustion engine to know that people want airbags and seat belts and cushion pads on the dashboard, right? They want safety, okay? So it just has to be translated into English, telescope the time frame, and start the bombardment of the United States House and Senate, and you will get the response which you are looking for, and we will win. Mohamad?
Yeah, a quick thing. I gotta tell you, watching that Facebook thing was so horrible. I was so embarrassed. You know, a little fact, there are only 4 members of the entire House of Representatives, that's 435 people, that had an engineering degree. We are a technical society now. We're a society, a country that's built on technology, and I have to say, I think a big part of the solution is we need new leaders in Congress. So whether it's here in Massachusetts, we have, you know, good leaders from Massachusetts, but from this room, from, you know, this campus, I think we can use technology to help spread the word to other states where their leaders are really, I'm sorry to say, not fit to represent the country that we are today.
Yeah, let me just say this. Climate change is a good example. But where people know what the right thing is, they don't have to necessarily understand all of the chemicals that are going up into the atmosphere. They don't have to understand necessarily what the process is that leads to the warming. All they have to know is Pope Francis said in his Sermon on the Hill when he came to Washington 2 years ago. Because all you have to know is 3 things. 1, the planet is dangerously warming. 2, as he said, human beings are the principal contributor to it. 3, the poorest people on the planet are going to be those that are most adversely affected. And it's the moral responsibility of the people in this room here in Congress to do something about it. You don't have to understand more than that. The same thing is true with privacy online. You don't have to be a genius to know, you don't have to understand the pharmaceutical industry to know that there should be a child safety cap on opioids. Huh? You don't have to understand the opioid, you just have to know it's dangerous and you want children to be protected. And the same thing is true with regard to safeguards for protecting children's privacy online in the Facebook era, right? And adults as well, but you should at least have rules for children, right? So I just think that Congress has to get educated. It's a relatively simple principle that we're trying to communicate: non-discrimination, you know, protection for the smallest, most democratic voices, and the most entrepreneurial, creative people in the country that want to be able to get their idea out into the marketplace. Okay, so it's complicated on the one hand, nuclear physics is, but nuclear safety is not. Internal combustion engine is, but auto safety is not. And the same thing is true here in the internet. Okay, so you just have to understand that you already know more than enough. And the truth is that the American people don't trust the experts anymore to tell them you don't know enough. You can't figure this out. The American people have figured it out. On net neutrality, it's 86%. On privacy, it's 80%. And in both instances, it's Democrat and Republican. And on privacy, Europe already figured it out. And if Europe can figure it out on a technology that we've invented, we should be able to figure out what the safety protections are that we
I have to ask a very uncomfortable question. I'd like to get more at the core of what I feel is important. And first of all, I want to thank every single one of you for coming here and really helping us to try to understand what to do to maintain something that should be our right, this net neutrality. And thank you, Senator Markey, really for putting this together. Greatly appreciate it. I just want, and also thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for having the courage to stand up at a crucial time and give us hope, that we really do have a democracy. When you voted in our favor, I really appreciate that. My question is, there's a lot of dark forces that I'm aware of. I've been a lot on the internet trying to find out what's happening behind the scenes. And it's kind of making the rest of my hair fall out, actually. And so my question is probably directed more to Senator Markey and to Mr. Wheeler, but could be directed to anybody on the panel. And that is, how did you deal with the dark forces that would like to crush our ability to have net neutrality the first time around when you courageously stood up and said, no, I'm not going with the darkness, I'm going with the light. So I'm asking both of you how we can deal with it this time, because I'm aware that they will really try to, these forces, or your shadowy individuals, will try to rise up and defeat us again.
That's a good question. Okay, so there's a Dickensian quality to the internet. It's the best of technologies and the worst of technologies simultaneously. It can enable, it can ennoble. It can degrade, it can debase. So whether it's Facebook or any of these other companies, we sublude the enabling and the enabling. But we also know that there's a sinister side to cyberspace. And we have to build in the protections. And those who profit, who make money on that sinister side of cyberspace, are going to fight. They believe in anti-consumer, anti-competitive, anti-privacy. So it's a battle. We had it with every other industry, and Mohamad went back to the 19th century with the railroad industry. It's not easy. It's hard. It's very hard. But we are revolutionaries. The American Revolution wasn't easy. The abolitionist movement wasn't easy. The suffragette movement wasn't easy. The gay marriage movement wasn't easy. The Affordable Care Act wasn't easy, but we had revolutionaries who said, we are going to do it, and it starts here in Massachusetts. And the sinister side of cyberspace of what is meeting its day of reckoning. It has arrived, but it requires the actions of ordinary citizens to rise up. We saw it in the grammar school and high school and college kids from Rock Street to Boston Common, 50,000 of them on gun safety just 2 weeks ago. We're seeing it on other issues. We just have to be good citizens. That's happened here since 1775, April 19th, 2 days ago. On papers, right? And it continues today. So that's the answer, okay? There is no simple answer. The answer is here. Now, I don't, if any, yes, Susan.
Just to chime in on, I don't know if you guys know this, but the parallel to electrification is exact. That it used to be that just a few private companies controlled electricity in America, and they were systematically leaving out the poor, leaving out rural areas, and looking for all kinds of ways to make as much money as possible in rich areas. And it took FDR going up against the electrical interests in the 1932 presidential campaign to change that situation. So you may not think of electricity as one of these revolutions, but in fact it was. And today, high capacity, ubiquitous, cheap internet access is our electricity.
Yeah, the utility industry doesn't want to win. The utility industry does not want to win in solar revolution. Okay, that MIT invented like 50 years ago here. Okay, it doesn't get blocked because of the market. It gets blocked because of utilities, monopolies that don't want it introduced. The same thing is true for these phones and for all the other issues that we're talking about. Okay? It requires good citizens who are out there working hard and keeping their energy level high. And I will tell you something, we win every time, okay? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, like we run on every year. And then you admire that young woman going across through the wind, coming in, and the rain coming in horizontally, and you say, oh my God. And that's who we've been politically since the beginning of the origin of this Commonwealth, okay? That's how we have to be now.
Tom, 30 seconds.
Yes.
Lots of talk about making America great. right? What made America great was how we dealt with these challenges in the past. The senator went through a laundry list, but how we stepped up and dealt with the challenges is the secret of what America is. It is not running away from them under some hazy, gauzy image of returning to something back then, or walking away from your responsibility as a regulator or as a legislator to step up and deal with the tough issues. That's what made America great, and that's the challenge we've got before us now.
So we're going to take a few more questions, but Sir Tim has actually delayed his flight, so he can be here tonight. And I promised that we would let him out of here at 8 o'clock. And I was just standing here and saying, you know, it's almost like 1775 in reverse. You know, we're looking to someone from Great Britain to tell us how to get our freedom. To give us what you want us to remember from tonight, going forward over the next month and years on this battle.
Whoa. There a second. I want you to remember that at the core of this is about fundamental principles in human rights. But I want you to think about when you worry about the dark forces out there. You're not worried. Just asking the question about the dark forces. I think you should don't just think about the people, about the actors, and don't assume that the actors are all malicious. Realize that, particularly from things that go on in social networks, you can take a bunch of really nice people and put them in a system which makes them end up not being constructive. And that could be a social network which ends up accelerating the hatred more than the love. It can be a political system where you end up with a campaign finance system which actually makes it a very, very dysfunctional democracy, even though it's set up with the best of intents. So look at the systems. So I say look at the systems, and don't assume that you have to keep the systems that you have, but incrementally. Like I was born in London. In London, you couldn't. I don't think you can. You can't advertise as a political party. You can't. They decided you can't use the television because it's too powerful a medium for persuading people. So political parties could not put ads on the television, but they can use Facebook targeted ads. So think about the systems. Think about and be prepared to dramatically change the system so that all of the good spirits, which are on both sides of the aisle and across the planet, all of these in people are brought out, and so that people become constructive instead of counterproductive naturally because of the way they work together.
So we're going to go for 13 more minutes until 8:15. 13 more minutes. We're going to try to give quick answers to your questions. Yes, sir.
Hello. I just wanted to say it's a great panel, and as an undergraduate here, I really appreciated hearing from you guys about this. And I would say fighting for like startups, non-discrimination, allowing free speech on the internet is something that I think all of us here support. And I was really wondering about the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act that took effect from Congress a little while ago, and how it plays into Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because it was unnecessary to bring down like Backpage.com, which was lost its appeal before the law took place. And as a result of the law, like a lot of small companies can't afford to like censor their content and have risk getting lawsuits from the federal government.
Okay, great. You want to take that, Tom? Or Susan?
Though Section 230 has been enormously helpful to the American online platform industry, sort of a First Amendment for the platforms, that they're not liable for what other people post. And personally, from my perspective, any limitation on that principle is a grave risk to us. You know, this battle's going to just keep going on. The pendulum swings from left to right to left to right. I want us to hold on to basic principles of democracy, decency, equity, fairness, and push for that. If you're going to use your energy, look for that, rather than the minutiae of regulation when it comes to that.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
First, thank you all for your time. My question is, the crux of the problem with net neutrality, I think, seems to be that there's companies who want to have all the privileges that you said of being a utility, the sort of monopoly aspect, without the regulations that normally come with being a monopoly and a utility. And the approach to solve that is regulate them like a utility. Why is it difficult to actually create a free market? As you said, free markets with phones can have, for example, very powerful impacts. What's blocking there being a free market? Could that have a...
Okay, let me tell you. There's a paradox to the free market. Okay, so think of it this way. There's an electricity wire, there's a telephone wire, there's a cable wire. They all are very close to their local regulators, and historically, they're federal regulators. They love the rules and regulations. They love them, utilities. Why? Because those regulations don't make it possible for competitors to get in. That's why they love the regulations. So the paradox of deregulation is that you need more regulations in order to make it possible for Muhammad Ali and his company to get started. This would have been invented 40 years ago if there were rules that said other companies can come in. So the trick to the free market in regulated markets is more regulation that says to smaller players, you now can get in a non-discriminatory way, where you don't need 100 lawyers to fend off the utility that has 5,000 lawyers before you can ever get your product to market. So you then rely upon the new regulations to go to the capital markets to raise the money, to create a free market in those new ideas that had been stultified by regulations that the utilities put on the books to make sure that the new, smaller companies didn't start. And that's where Tom Wheeler comes in, and being the hero at the FCC and passing these rules like net neutrality, the privacy rules, and many other rules which he put on the books, which encourage more competitors to come into the marketplace. Do you want to add anything to that, Tom?
Well, you know, these are very high cost, fixed cost industries to put the line in the first place. So it really only makes sense to have one communications line going into each house. The way you create competition is actually to force that line to be shared by a bunch of actors. That's traditionally how we've done it, and how countries around the world have done it. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science. And in fact, San Francisco is moving towards that model right now with its municipal fiber network. So that, you know, left to their own devices, it's not malign, it's not mean, it's not evil. It is so expensive to build these networks that of course you will take rich markets, cream off profits, leave people behind who don't fit your business model, and make as much money as you can from this very expensive installed infrastructure. But that's what happens without a cop on the beat, and that's why it's important that there be regulatory authority in the FCC, and that's what Tom Wheeler did.
So, I mean, example, Google tried to build fiber, right? An amazing thing, every time Google said, we're coming to town and we're gonna build gigabit fiber here, two things happened. One, the incumbent said, we're rebuilding our plant. And two, we're lowering our prices. And then three, they said, so you want to get on our utility poles, huh? You want to get in our conduits under the street? Fat chance. And they got state legislatures and others to back them up on that so they could thwart there being a true competitor, which then leads us back to Susan, and this is why you have to have rules.
Mohamad? Yeah, I want to add to this. I think this free market discussion is is one of the most important aspects of this. There are a couple of elements to it. One element is that the internet is actually a little bit different than many other technologies that we have today, in that it does touch everything, and it could actually, if 5 companies control it, it could actually affect the free market, and we could not have a free market. And the original founders of our country recognized this, and every century there's been a major threat to that, and every time, as a leadership, our Congress and Senate have risen to the moment to actually address this, because it's at the heart of America's competitiveness. And so that's the free market on everybody else, but the carriers. On the carrier side, you say, well, you also want a free market there. And it turns out that even today, we don't really have a free market there. 2/3 of all Americans only have one source of broadband. They have one option. There's not really a free market there. And thank you for mentioning the Google Go Fiber thing, because what we need there is competition as well. And this takes away competition on that end. So our ability to actually drive down the cost that the rest of the companies would see is actually being limited by giving this advantage to these large 5 companies. So on either direction, you're actually negatively impacting the free market. And I mean, I have to say, as an immigrant to this country, I didn't actually come here thinking, oh, what a great free market. But having benefited from it, having lived it, having seen so many, I think you might know this, 40% of all Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants and children of immigrants, and a big part of that is because of this free market platform that exists here in America and nowhere else. And so, this is actually a major threat, and a threat that we've only seen, sort of once per century. So we kind of have to rise to the occasion and address it.
Beautiful. Okay, beautiful, Mohamad. Thank you. 4 minutes left to go. We'll try to give quicker answers. Yes.
So, Mr. Wheeler, earlier you touched on the importance of data protection, like private data, personal data. Europe seems to have a significant lead there. I'm wondering if anyone can speak to what is the EU getting right as far as private data protection, say right to be forgotten, things like that, versus or is there a uniquely American model that we should take?
So go to the April 1st issue of the New York Times. There's a very thoughtful op-ed piece by somebody in there, headlined, "Will Europe lead the way on privacy?" They do several things. They say it's your information and it has to be all opt-in. They give you the ability to go in and erase, see what's there and erase things. They have the ability to take your information with you so that you can turn around and say to Mark Zuckerberg, "Thank you very much. I want my information because I'm going to your new competitor." And a whole series of things like that.
I introduced the Privacy Bill of Rights last week with Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut. Pretty simple. Number one, they have to give you knowledge that they're gathering that information about you. 2, notice that they're reusing it for purposes other than that which you and your family had intended. And 3, the right to say no. Knowledge, notice, no. Very simple. Everything is simple. We can write out the details of it, but it is very simple. Yes, sir. We're down to 2 more minutes. Go ahead.
Quickly, John Kerry, when he was Secretary of State, declared that, as you all have been saying, that open internet access is a fundamental right. The current nominee, Mike Pompeo, as a representative, voted against net neutrality several times. So I know that for once, in the minority, Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee have the ability to stop the nomination by refusing to report it at all. Will you will you vote to report it unfavorably and save the nomination, or will you refuse to report it at
You
all?
know, here's where we are, okay? We're in the internet era. We're in the speed of light era. We're in an era where information just travels from here to Osaka and back. So it must have been kind of missing somehow or other that 2 days ago, I announced that I'm absolutely voting against Mike Pompeo. One final question over here.
Senator, my question is for you. One of the most arresting things about the reporting that happened around net neutrality for me was the reporting specifically about the sums of money that were paid to political campaigns by telecom companies in order for them in order to secure their support. Those sums of money were incredibly small. And putting myself in the telecom company's shoes, I have a hard time seeing why I wouldn't do that. And looking back over the past 10 years of political activity that I've been aware, like, there are so many examples of that. Are we missing here a golden opportunity to really address campaign finance reform? Because I feel like that's at the heart of a lot of things that all of us care about.
Chairman Wheeler already talked about this. There's no question about it. When somebody polls out at 80% of the American public supporting Chairman Wheeler's regulations on privacy for internet service providers, and the Republicans come out first thing last March, Donald Trump's in, and they all vote in lockstep, all of them. All those people who you say good Republicans want, they all voted to take those privacy rules off the books. Okay? They thought they could get away with it. And to a certain extent, they did. Until Facebook. Until Mark Zuckerberg's testimony. So now you start to see the consequences of it, and you got to connect the dots. Okay? And if you want campaign finance reform, you don't want the Koch brothers to influence the political process, then, and you don't want Supreme Court justices who are going to rubber stamp anti-democratic laws, then get out there and work in 2018, okay? It's an ongoing democratic revolution that goes on in our country. You want campaign finance reform, you gotta go out there, stop their ability to nominate any more justices who will continue the Citizens United versus FEC malign influence on the political process, and then head towards 2020 so we have a president, named Supreme Court justices, that we can then bring a case to begin to repeal Citizens United and put real campaign finance laws on the books. But it's not happening until the election day of 2018 and the 2020, so just get out there and vote. So let me just finish and ask each one of you to give us the 1 minute by Tim Berners-Lee that you want us to remember as we're leaving here today. So we'll start with you, Susan, then go to you, Tom, and wind up with you, Mohamad, with the final word. So Susan, please tell us what they should know.
I actually learned this line from Senator Markey. We should be looking the rest of the world in the rearview mirror when it comes to our open internet access, our allegiance to free speech, our connection to our fellow citizens, our concern for equity and fairness and good treatment. And this principle of net neutrality is an embodiment of everything we care about as Americans. And the only reason that we're in this city on a hill is because we respect those principles. It's our opportunity right now to be politically active, to ask every candidate questions about net neutrality and the state of internet access in America. And we have to undergo what is likely to be a chaotic change in order to get to the kind of country we want. But unless we are extremely active, it won't happen. So please, each one of you is now an activist.
The internet is 35 years old, started in 1983, again here. And for the first 25 years, it was clearly a net neutrality governed network because it was on telephone lines. And telephone lines were common carrier. Remember those screeching modems that you had to plug into your wall jack, right? You had to be let on to that network to go wherever you wanted because that network was a common carrier. And it was that capability that delivered AOL, CompuServe, BBM, all of the kinds of things that were the beginning of what we take for granted today. What happened was that as networks went digital, the companies owning those networks started a PR campaign and said, oh, this is different. This is entirely different. No, it's not. You're delivering just like you were before. How zeros and ones versus analog does not trump what? But they convinced the FCC that that's what the case should be. Then they started going to court every time a Republican or Democratic, but a Republican FCC would do something. They would go to court and say, we can discriminate because we're not a common carrier. When my predecessors, the first Obama effort at open internet was appealed by Verizon, the Verizon lawyer stood instructed by my client that I may say that the reason we are appealing this is we intend to discriminate. That's what we have to stand up against. We need to have the internet worked when there was non-discrimination. The internet has to continue to have the same kind of upward trajectory it had when you have choice and non-discrimination.
Thank you, sir. You know, I love the fact that we're here at MIT. We have become a country where technology is a really, really important part of everything we do, including, you know, the grandma from Louisiana. And unfortunately, a lot of our leadership doesn't understand technology, doesn't understand how it impacts our life. And net neutrality is an interesting example. You know, a lot of people think it's this odd and cryptic thing, when in fact, it's actually this one in every century threat to the free market system. And I think people don't fully understand that. And somehow it's been turned into a Republican-Democrat issue, and it's not. You pick any state out there, and they are, the people of those states, Nebraska, let's just pick Nebraska, there's a state where the people will be negatively impacted by the elimination of net neutrality. So why is it that we can't get the senators and congresspeople in those states to recognize this threat to the free market? It's really a threat to what's made America great. I hate to talk about making America great because of the, but there is a special sauce about the American, you know, as Senator Markey says, business model, and this is in fact a threat to it. So I think you know, it's sort of odd. We find ourselves at a time where rational thought doesn't win the day. I mean, there was a time when the United States Senate voted 52-1 to pass the Sherman Antitrust Act. I mean, that's imagine a Senate that would rationally think about the threats and look at this big business and say, hey, you know what? We're actually going to do the right thing for the country, not just for these railroads. So what's happening to our country? So there's actually this larger picture, you know, odd thing that is happening in our country. And net neutrality is sort of getting stuck. You know, it's almost a hostage to this larger issue in the country. So while, you know, we're here to talk about net neutrality today, and it is absolutely an important topic, you know, this is a university. There are students that are going to go back to every state. And as Susan said, I think we all need to, whatever state we're going back to, or whether you're going to start a company here, and that company is going to have employees like Carbonite does in Indianapolis and Salt Lake City, the people in this room, the people in this university are going to have a reach beyond Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I ask you to use that reach, use the technical skills you're developing here to either yourselves be the next generation of leaders for this country, or your students, or encourage others to do so. Because I really think we're at a time where the leadership doesn't actually fit where the country is, and net neutrality is just a victim of this problem. So thank you.
So we had a great night, and we thank all of you for coming. And so I'll take you back to 1966 when the Defense Department went to AT&T and asked them if they wanted to build a packet switch network that would be an alternative to the long distance system across the country. And AT&T said, no, we have a monopoly. We really don't want the contract. And then they went to IBM and they asked them, would you want to help to build this packet switch computer-based network? And IBM said, no, we don't want it. We have a monopoly. And so they went to a very small company out there on Memorial Drive, BB&N, Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, and gave them the contract. And a whole bunch of MIT scientists began the process of inventing something that was called DARPANET, that in 1991, we in Congress voted to move over to the private sector from the public sector. All public money, all federal research built it. And now, AT&T and other companies are saying, oh my goodness, look at all the competition which that is providing. Look what happens outside of our control. And history, once again, begins to repeat itself. So it's never ending. Democracy is tough. Keeping markets open are tough. Monopolies always try to shut them down. And you were right, sir, put big money into the political process, not to influence those decisions. So this is our moment. I saw it in 1979. I've been 42 years on the Telecommunications Committee. No one has ever tried that before, or will again. So I have heard every single theory, and the key hearing was 1979. There was a bill in Congress to prohibit breaking up AT&T. AT&T had 1.2 million employees. Nobody else had any. You want MCI? You want Sprint? Well, you better break up AT&T. You better change that monopoly. So we had the hearing, and the CEO, chief counsel of AT&T were there, and I brought out a black rotary dial phone, which everybody in America had. And I just started to take it apart. And I asked them, how long would it take that we could actually allow other companies to get into this marketplace? And I was informed in the hearing that, oh my goodness, if other companies started to make those phones in competition, it could bring down the entire phone system in Greater Boston. You just don't understand, Congressman. It's too complicated for you, this technology. Huh? And I stood up, left that hearing, and I said, we've got to break up AT&T. You can't brag about winning 10 Nobel Prizes in basic research and 0 in applied research, huh? And actually putting it out into the marketplace. Okay? Black rotary dial phones had to go. We needed more long distance companies, and today that fight continues, and it's our job. And that's why one more vote is so important. Okay? One more vote. Hashtag one more vote. You have the whole world in your hands right here from MIT. You all know how to organize online. It's no longer revolutionaries at Lexington Green. You're online, and you're creative, and you're trying to figure out how to go across state lines, how to get more people organized to bombard Congress over the next month with this message. Hashtag one more vote. I thank you all for being here. Let's give one final to this incredible all-star team.
Oh, you. Thanks.
But the one that really sort of dug in with Markey